Mark Reynolds always believed he had won the divorce. He had the high-powered finance job, the gleaming downtown condo, and the trophy wife who looked perfect on his arm. His ex Ava well, she had a tiny apartment above a bakery and a dusty little business restoring old art. He'd scroll through the rare photos she posted, hands stained with pigment, a smudge of dirt on her cheek, and laugh. He'd even send her patronizing texts. "Hope you're doing okay, Ava. Let me know if you need help making ends meet." He saw her life as small, simple, and sad. A black and white film compared to his Technicolor blockbuster. That was until the night of the St. Jude's Foundation Gala, the most exclusive event of the year. Mark was there to network. And then he saw her. Not just at the gala, but arriving at the grand entrance, stepping out of a black Rolls-Royce Ghost on the arm of a man whose name was whispered in boardrooms with the kind of reverence reserved for kings. The divorce decree felt as cold and final as the marble countertops Mark had insisted on installing in their marital home. To him, the document was a trophy, a certificate of his upgrade. To Ava, it was the formal acknowledgement of her own erasure. For 12 years, her life had been a supporting role in the Mark Reynolds story. She had been the dutiful wife, the charming hostess, the patient listener to his endless monologues about market fluctuations and hostile takeovers at Bainbridge Financial. She had shelved her own passion, a degree in art history and conservation, to create a perfect, seamless world for him to come home to. A world he had shattered with 4 simple words, whispered over a lukewarm dinner she'd spent hours preparing. "I've met someone else." The someone else was Tiffany, a 25-year-old marketing assistant from his firm, with teeth as white as the marble countertops and an ambition that mirrored Mark's own. The divorce was ruthlessly efficient. Mark, with his team of aggressive lawyers, framed it as a generous act of liberation. He was setting her free. He kept the condo, the car, the art they'd collected, which he saw as investments. She saw as friends and the social circle they'd built. Ava was left with a modest settlement that, after legal fees, was just enough to sting. It was a calculated sum, enough to keep her from being destitute, but not enough to be comfortable. It was in his mind a fair price for her 12 years of service. She found a small one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood Mark would have sneeringly called up-and-coming. It was situated above a bustling Vietnamese bakery, and her mornings were filled with the scent of fresh bread and strong coffee instead of the sterile lemon-scented cleaner their maid had used. The floorboards creaked, the plumbing groaned, and for the first time in over a decade, Ava felt the stirrings of a life that was entirely her own. She used the bulk of her settlement to rent a small, forgotten workshop a few blocks away. It was a dusty, neglected space with a large north-facing window that flooded the room with the perfect, consistent light for her work. She spent weeks scrubbing the floors, painting the walls, a calming slate grey, and setting up her easel, her solvents, her fine-haired brushes, and her magnifying lamps. She named her business Viridian Restoration, a nod to the brilliant green pigment she loved. Her first jobs were small ones, sourced from local antique shops and flea markets. A cracked porcelain doll, a water-damaged 19th century portrait of a stern-looking ancestor, a wooden chest with a peeling lacquer finish. Her hands, once soft and manicured for Mark's corporate parties, became stained with turpentine gesso and gold leaf. She developed a permanent ache in her lower back from hunching over canvases for hours. She ate sandwiches standing up for lunch and often worked late into the night, guided by the glow of her task light. The rest of the world falling away as she focused on bringing a piece of forgotten beauty back to life. This was the simple life Mark pitied so deeply. He couldn't help himself. About once a month, a text would appear on her phone. "Hey, saw your business page on Facebook. Cute little hobby you've got there. Hope it's keeping you busy." Ava would read the words, the condescension dripping from them like poison. A hobby. He saw her life's passion, the skills she had honed since college as a little pastime to keep the poor divorcee occupied. She rarely replied. Another time, a photo attached to his text, him and Tiffany on a yacht in Monaco, champagne flutes in hand. The caption, "Thinking of you. Remember that time we went to Cannes Good Times? Hope you're doing okay. Don't hesitate to reach out if things get tight." Each message was a small, cruel twist of the knife designed to remind her of the life she had lost and the supposed squalor she now lived in. He wasn't just happy in his new life. He needed her to be miserable in hers. It was the only way he could be sure he had won. He told their old mutual friends, with a sigh of feigned concern, "I worry about Ava. She's really simplifying. It's a bit sad, honestly, from hosting charity dinners to fixing chipped picture frames. But you know, whatever makes her happy, I guess." The narrative was set. Mark, the magnanimous victor, Ava, the pitiable cast-off. One Tuesday afternoon, Ava was working on a particularly challenging piece, a Dutch Golden Age still life that had suffered a significant tear in the canvas. The work was painstaking, requiring her to reweave the threads with a surgical needle before even thinking about inpainting. She was so absorbed, she didn't hear the chime of the bell above her workshop door. "Excuse me, Ms. Thorne," a voice called out. Ava looked up, blinking to adjust her eyes. An older gentleman in a beautifully tailored but understated suit stood in the doorway, holding a fedora in his hands. He looked distinctly out of place in her humble workshop. "Just Ava is fine," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Can I help you?" "My name is Arthur Covington. I am the curator of a private collection," he said, his eyes scanning her workshop, not with disdain, but with professional curiosity. He noted the orderly arrangement of her tools, the quality of her ventilation system, the test patches on a discarded canvas. "I was given your name by Professor Albright at the university. He spoke very highly of your work." Ava felt a flush of pride. Professor Albright had been her mentor. "He's very kind. What can I do for you, Mr. Covington? My employer has a piece he would like you to evaluate. It is of significant personal value and has sustained some damage in a recent relocation." He gestured to two men standing discreetly outside by a nondescript black van. "May we bring it in?" "Of course," Ava said, clearing her largest easel. The men entered, carrying a massive climate-controlled art crate. With practiced care, they opened it and revealed the painting inside. Ava audibly gasped. It was a John Singer Sargent, a portrait of a young woman on a windswept coast, her expression filled with a defiant sort of melancholy. It was breathtaking, even with the ugly branching crackle that marred the upper left quadrant, and a small puncture near the edge of the frame. It was a masterpiece she had only ever seen in textbooks. This is the Lady of the Cliffs," she whispered, her fingers hovering inches from the canvas, afraid to touch it. "I thought it was lost. The last record of its sale was in 1958. Mr. Covington smiled faintly. "It has been in the Devereux family ever since. My employer, Mr. Sebastian Devereux, inherited it from his grandmother." She was the woman in the painting. Ava felt a wave of dizziness. The Devereux family. The name wasn't flashy like a rock star or a tech mogul, but in the circles of old money, art, and global influence, it was legendary. They were patrons of museums, benefactors of universities, quiet owners of vast swaths of industry and technology. They didn't court publicity, they avoided it. "Mr. Devereux would like to know if it can be saved," Arthur said, "and if you are the person to do it." For the next hour, Ava forgot who the client was. She was a conservator, and this was the patient. She examined the craquelure with her magnifying lamp, tested the varnish with a minuscule swab in an inconspicuous corner, and analyzed the canvas structure from the back. She spoke with a quiet, fierce authority, explaining the delicate process of consolidation, the risks of solvent interaction, the meticulous nature of inpainting required to match Sargent's famously fluid brushstrokes. Arthur Covington listened intently, not interrupting once. When she was finished, he simply nodded. "Mr. Devereux is a very private man," he said. He prefers not to conduct business at his home or office. He would like to meet you here at your convenience to discuss your proposal." Ava, still buzzing with the artistic challenge, simply nodded. "Of course, my schedule is flexible." She had no idea that in agreeing to restore a painting, she was about to completely rebuild her life. The following Thursday, a simple dark grey sedan pulled up outside Viridian Restoration. It was an Audi A8, an expensive car to be sure, but a far cry from the ostentatious Lamborghini or Ferrari that Mark would have chosen to make a statement. A man stepped out of the driver's side. He was tall and lean, dressed in dark jeans, a simple grey cashmere sweater, and a well-worn leather jacket. He had thoughtful dark eyes, a shadow of stubble on his jaw, and an air of quiet confidence that needed no announcement. He looked to be in his early 40s. Ava assumed he was an assistant or a younger family member. "Ms. Thorne," he asked, his voice a low, pleasant baritone. "Ava, please," she corrected, offering a hand. "And you are Sebastian Devereux," he said, shaking her hand. His grip was firm and warm. Ava blinked, trying to hide her surprise. She had expected someone older, sterner, more corporate. He looked more like an architect or a professor than a man who could buy and sell entire city blocks. There were no bodyguards, no entourage, just him. "Mr. Devereux, I apologize, I wasn't expecting for me to come myself." He smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes. "My grandmother used to say, if something is important enough to own, it's important enough to care for yourself. This painting is very important to me. Please show me what you found." He spent the next 2 hours in her workshop. But unlike other clients who would ask about cost and timeline, Sebastian asked about the how. He was fascinated by the process. He looked through her microscope at the delicate web of cracks, asked about the chemical composition of the 19th century pigments, and listened with rapt attention as she explained the theory behind varnish removal. He wasn't a dilettante asking superficial questions. His inquiries were intelligent, born of a genuine curiosity. He spoke about his grandmother Genevieve, the woman in the portrait. He told Ava stories about her fierce independence, her love for the sea, and how she had scandalized her family by refusing to marry the British aristocrat they'd chosen for her. "She had this quiet strength," Sebastian said, his eyes on the portrait. "She never shouted, but you always knew where she stood. She valued substance over performance." He then looked around Ava's workshop at the neatly organized tools and the works in progress. She would have liked this place. It's honest. Ava felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. No one had ever called her work honest before. Mark had called it a mess. At the end of the meeting, he approved her detailed proposal without even glancing at the fee. "Take as long as you need," he said. "The goal is to do it right, not to do it fast." Over the next few months, their meetings became a regular occurrence. Sebastian would stop by the workshop every week or so, ostensibly, to check on the painting's progress. But soon the conversations drifted. They talked about art history books, travel. He discovered she had a dry, witty sense of humor that had been buried under years of placating Mark. She discovered he was surprisingly down-to-earth, with a passion for sustainable farming and a frustration with the stuffy formal world he was often forced to inhabit. One afternoon, he arrived with 2 cups of coffee from the bakery downstairs. "I thought you might need a break," he said, noticing the fatigue in her eyes. They sat on 2 mismatched stools by the window, the scent of oil paint mingling with the aroma of coffee. "You know," he said, "I Googled your ex-husband." Ava stiffened. "Oh, Mark Reynolds, Bainbridge Financial. Seems very, polished," Sebastian said, choosing his word carefully. "He's very concerned with appearances." Ava said, her voice neutral. "I can imagine," Sebastian said, taking a sip of coffee. He looked at her directly. "He doesn't strike me as someone who would understand the value of bringing something broken back to life. He seems more like the type to just throw it away and buy a new one." The observation was so startlingly accurate that Ava couldn't help but let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a laugh that felt rusty unused. For the first time, she felt truly seen. He didn't pity her. He understood the fundamental difference between her and Mark, and he valued her way of being. Their relationship shifted that day. The weekly check-ins turned into lunches at a small Italian place around the corner, then dinners at quiet restaurants he knew where they wouldn't be bothered. He never once tried to impress her with his wealth. He drove his Audi, not one of the more exotic cars he surely owned. He talked about his work in renewable energy, not his stock portfolio. He was interested in her, her thoughts, her past, her dreams for the future of her little business. For Ava, it was a revelation. She had spent so long contorting herself to fit into Mark's world that she had forgotten what it felt like to be appreciated for her own. With Sebastian, she wasn't an accessory, she was the main event. Meanwhile, Mark's life continued its glossy trajectory. He and Tiffany were the new power couple in their social set. Their Instagram feeds were a curated highlight reel of five-star resorts, designer clothes, and charity events where they pose for photographers with fixed, brilliant smiles. One Saturday, Mark was driving his Porsche Cayenne through a neighborhood he rarely visited, taking a scenic route to a brunch Tiffany had insisted they attend. He drove past Ava's workshop. Through the large front window, he could see her. She was laughing, her head thrown back. Sitting across from her on one of her work stools was a man. Mark couldn't see him clearly, but he looked relaxed, comfortable. They were sharing a bottle of wine and a pizza from a box balanced on a stack of books. A hot, ugly feeling coiled in Mark's stomach. It wasn't just that she was with a man. It was that she looked genuinely, effortlessly happy. It was a look he hadn't seen on her face in years, not even when he'd gifted her a diamond bracelet for their 10th anniversary. Her happiness felt like a personal affront. It didn't fit his narrative. She was supposed to be struggling lonely, pining for the life he had taken from her. He pulled over down the street, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He took out his phone and sent a text. "Drove past your shop. Looks like you're keeping busy. Glad you're getting out there and meeting people. I was worried you'd just become a hermit. Just be careful, Ava. There are guys who take advantage of women in vulnerable situations." Ava's phone buzzed on the workbench. She glanced at the message, her smile faltering for a second. She read the toxic blend of feigned concern and blatant insult. A year ago, it would have ruined her day. It would have made her feel small and foolish. Now she looked across at Sebastian, who was telling a funny story about his failed attempt to build a bookshelf, and she felt nothing but a distant pity for the man who sent the text. He was so trapped in his world of status and dominance that he couldn't comprehend a reality outside of it. She deleted the message without replying and turned her full attention back to the man in front of her, the man who saw value in what was broken and who was piece by piece helping her restore herself. The final brushstroke was a whisper of umber and gold. Ava stepped back from the easel, her heart a steady, quiet drum in her chest. For 6 months, John Singer Sargent's The Lady of the Cliffs had been her world. She had lived inside its cracking varnish and damaged canvas, meticulously coaxing the soul of the painting back to the surface. Now, Genevieve Devereux stared out at her, not as a damaged artifact, but as a living, breathing presence, her defiant melancholy restored to its full captivating power. It was, Ava knew without a shred of doubt, the masterpiece of her career. The restoration had mirrored her own. In those same 6 months, the careful, tentative friendship with Sebastian Devereux had bloomed into a love that was as profound as it was private. Their relationship existed in a world of their own making, far from the glare of public life. It was built in the quiet moments in her workshop, where he would sit for hours as reading a book, while she worked, perfectly content just to be in her presence. It was found in their shared laughter over a burnt dinner in her tiny kitchen, and in the long, meandering conversations on rain-slicked city streets under a shared umbrella. He never tried to change her or her life. He simply fit himself into it, bringing with him a sense of peace and unwavering support she had never known. He loved her workshop, calling it one of the most honest rooms in New York. He loved the scent of turpentine that clung to her clothes and the smudges of pigment that sometimes appeared on her cheek. He loved her not in spite of her simple life, but because of the substance and authenticity it represented. Meanwhile, Mark was consumed by his own impending triumph, the St. Jude's Foundation Gala. He spoke of it incessantly to Tiffany and their dwindling circle of mutual friends who could tolerate his hubris. It's not just about the donation, he explained to a colleague over an overpriced lunch. It's about access. You get in that room, you're breathing the same air as the people who move the world. This is how you level up. To him, the gala wasn't a charity event. It was a career strategy, a social conquest. He had already rehearsed his opening lines for the half-dozen power brokers he planned to corner. He remained blissfully, arrogantly unaware of the true currents of power, mistaking a ticket in the nosebleeds for a seat at the king's table. Schonschont. The invitation, when it came, was not delivered in a formal card or a grand announcement. It was offered on a crisp autumn weekend at Sebastian's cabin upstate. The place was the antithesis of his public persona, a rustic, beautifully crafted log structure nestled deep in the woods, with a huge stone fireplace and shelves overflowing with books instead of awards. It was their sanctuary. They were sitting on the porch as the sun set, painting the Catskill Mountains in hues of orange and deep purple. A fire crackled inside, and the air smelled of pine and wood smoke. I find myself dreading. Next month, Sebastian said, casually, breaking a comfortable silence. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass of whiskey. Why's that? Ava asked, pulling a wool blanket tighter around her shoulders. The St. Jude's Gala, he said the name, dropping into the quiet evening like a stone. It's a necessary circus. My family's foundation has been a primary sponsor since my grandfather's time. The cause is unimpeachable, but the event itself, he sighed. It's a performance. I'm co-chairing this year, so there's no escaping it. Ava's stomach tightened. The St. Jude's Gala. The name was synonymous with a world she had joyfully left behind, a world of judgment, of social climbing, of transactional relationships. It was Mark's world. I have to be there. Front and center. Sebastian continued, turning to look at her, his eyes serious and gentle in the fading light. And I absolutely cannot imagine getting through the night with anyone but you by my side. Will you be my date, Ava? The question hung in the air, simple and direct. Her first instinct was a visceral, full-bodied no. A wave of fear, cold and sharp, washed over her. She pictured the cameras, the sea of critical faces, the whispers. She pictured Mark and Tiffany preening and posing. Sebastian. I can't, she said, her voice barely a whisper. That's not me. That world. It almost broke me. It's a world built on judging people on what you're wearing and who you know. I don't have anything to wear. I wouldn't know what to say. I would be a liability for you. He set his glass down and moved to sit beside her, taking her cold hands in his. Look at me, he said softly, waiting until her eyes met his. First, the practical things are meaningless. We can find you a dress or a suit of armor or a clown costume, whatever you want. That's just noise. Second, you would never be a liability to me. You are my greatest asset. He paused, his grip on her hands firming slightly. I know what you're afraid of. You're afraid of the ghosts. But you're not the same person you were. You're not going as anyone's wife or accessory. You'd be going as Ava Thorne, a brilliant artist, and as my partner. We aren't walking into their world, Ava. In that room on that night, they are guests in ours. We'll go, we'll support a great cause, and if it gets to be too much, I'll personally fake a heart attack so we can leave and get pizza. I promise. A small laugh escaped her lips, breaking the tension. He wasn't dismissing her fears. He was acknowledging them and offering her a shield and a promise of pizza. He was offering her a team, The defiant spark she had seen in his grandmother's portrait flickered within her. The thought of walking into that glittering hall, not as a broken woman, but as her own person, on the arm of a man who saw and valued her completely, began to transform from a terrifying prospect into a quietly thrilling one. "Okay," she said, a slow, resolute smile spreading across her face. "Yes, I'll go with you." The preparations were nothing like she had expected. There was no stressful shopping trip or pressure to fit into a specific mold. Instead, Sebastian arranged a private consultation with Alistair, a brilliant young couturier whose work was known for its intellectual elegance rather than its flash. Alistair's studio was a minimalist dream of white walls and northern light. He was warm and respectful, asking Ava about her work, her favorite artists, her favorite colors. A dress shouldn't wear the woman, he said. It should be a frame for her soul. Together, they designed the gown, a classic sculptural silhouette, in a deep, luminous sapphire silk that reminded Ava of the evening sky at the cabin. It was a dress that projected confidence and serenity, not a desperate plea for attention. The final piece fell into place the evening of the gala. Sebastian arrived at her apartment holding not a commercial jewelry box from a famous brand, but a worn dark blue velvet case. Inside, nestled on faded silk, lay an antique platinum necklace and matching earrings. They were composed of deep blue sapphires, surrounded by the subtle fiery sparkle of old mine-cut diamonds. "They were Genevieve's," Sebastian said softly, as he fastened the cool metal clasp at her neck. "She wore them to a state dinner in Paris in 1952. My grandfather wrote in a letter that she outshone everyone in the room, not because of the jewels, but because she seemed so completely herself. The sapphires reminded me of her eyes in the portrait." He turned her to face the mirror. "I think she would be very happy to know you're wearing them tonight." Ava stared at her reflection, and for the first time she saw no ghosts. She saw a woman who was whole, strong, ready. At that exact moment across town, Mark Reynolds was adjusting his bow tie in the mirror of his gleaming condo. Tiffany was taking a final selfie, angling her phone to best capture the glitter of her dress and the enormous diamond earrings Mark had leased for the occasion. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a conqueror's thrill. He was on top of the world. He thought of Ava, picturing her in her small apartment, probably eating leftovers, oblivious to the universe of power and glamour she was shut out of. He felt a final, irresistible urge to twist the knife to underscore his magnificent victory. He pulled out his phone. "Big night. Heading to the St. Jude's Gala. Wish you could see it. It's unreal. Reminds me of that time we tried to get tickets and couldn't lol. Anyway, hope your week is going well." He hit send, a smug smile on his face. In her apartment, Ava's phone buzzed on the dresser. She glanced at the screen, read the pathetic, condescending words from her ex-husband, and felt nothing but a distant wave of pity. She didn't even bother to delete it. She simply turned away from the phone and took Sebastian's outstretched arm. "Ready to go to the circus?" he asked, his eyes twinkling. "Ready," she replied, her voice clear and steady as a bell. The approach to the Metropolitan Museum of Art was a slow-moving river of polished black metal and flashing lights. It was a hierarchy in motion. At the bottom were the Ubers and luxury sedans, disgorging their occupants a half-block away. Higher up were the private town cars with drivers granted closer access. At the apex, a special lane was kept clear, an asphalt red carpet for the true titans. Mark and Tiffany arrived in their hired Uber. Black, a move Mark had calculated as the bare minimum for acceptable entry. "Okay, remember the plan," Mark muttered as they stepped out the warm July air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and exhaust fumes. "We get inside, grab a glass of champagne, and separate. You find the wives, I'll find the husbands. We're here to be seen to connect. This is work." Tiffany, a vision in a fiery red sequined gown that hugged every curve and was cut to her navel, barely listened. Her eyes were scanning the crowd, taking in the couture, identifying her social competitors. Is that Caroline Wexler in last season's Dior Tragic? To her, this wasn't work. It was warfare, and her appearance was her armor and her weapon. They made their way up the grand steps, navigating the gauntlet of paparazzi, whose flashes were mostly directed at the more prominent arrivals. Inside the great hall had been transformed into a celestial wonderland of shimmering lights and cascading floral arrangements. The sheer scale of the wealth on display was dizzying. At the check-in table, a severe-looking woman with a headset consulted a tablet. "Reynolds," she said, her voice flat. She ran a finger down the screen. "Ah, yes. You're at table 42. She handed them their table assignment with an air of finality, her eyes already looking past them to the next guest. Table 42. The number landed like a lead weight in Mark's stomach. It was in the outer orbit of the hall, tucked away near a service entrance with a grand marble pillar partially obstructing the view of the main stage. It screamed, afterthought, charity write-off. Not important. "Don't worry about it," he whispered to Tiffany, forcing a confident smile. "The real business gets done during the cocktail hour, not at the tables." He grabbed 2 glasses of champagne from a passing waiter and pressed one into her hand. "Now go, mingle, shine." For the next hour, Mark executed his plan with the desperate energy of a man who senses his time is running out. He intercepted a junior partner from a rival firm, laughing a little too loudly at a joke. He managed to shake the hand of a real estate developer, patting him on the back with an unearned familiarity. Each interaction felt fleeting, superficial. He was a moth fluttering at a sealed window, drawn to the light, but unable to get in. He saw the real conversations happening in tight, impenetrable circles, where deals were being made with a quiet nod and a handshake. He was on the outside, a fact that became more painfully obvious with each passing minute. Miles away in the hushed, climate-controlled interior of a Rolls-Royce Ghost, Ava took a slow, calming breath. The low thrum of the engine was a soothing counterpoint to the nervous flutter in her heart. She smoothed down the rich sapphire silk of her gown. It felt like a second skin, elegant, but not confining a world away from the restrictive, trend-driven dresses Mark had always insisted she wear. Sebastian reached over and took her hand. His was warm and steady. "Nervous. A little," she admitted. "It's been a long time since I've been to something like this. I feel like an imposter." He turned to her, his expression serious but kind. "Listen to me, Ava. You are the most authentic person I know. You are not an imposter. You are an artist. You are my partner, and you belong anywhere you choose to be. You are not here to perform for anyone. Just be you. That is more than enough." His words were a balm settling her nerves. He saw her not the role she was playing. As the car glided to a stop directly in front of the museum's grand entrance into the space kept sacredly empty, she felt a sense of calm resolve. The doorman, who had remained stoic for every other arrival, sprang to attention, opening Sebastian's door with a respectful bow. A wave of flashes erupted. The museum's director and the St. Jude's Foundation head were waiting at the top of the steps, their faces breaking into warm, genuine smiles. Sebastian emerged comfortable and commanding in his classic tuxedo. He turned and extended his hand back into the car. Ava placed her hand in his and stepped out into the incandescent glow. Mark had just cornered a city councilman, launching into a sycophantic monologue about zoning laws when the entire atmosphere of the cocktail hour shifted. Conversations lulled, heads turned in unison toward the entrance. A palpable wave of deference and curiosity washed through the hall. "It must be Devereux," the councilman muttered, his attention completely lost. He craned his neck along with everyone else. Annoyed at the interruption, Mark followed his gaze. He saw the Rolls-Royce, the fawning greeting committee. He saw Sebastian Devereux, a man who moved with the quiet gravitational pull of old money and true power. Mark felt a familiar bitter pang of envy. That was the level he aspired to. And then he saw the woman on Devereux's arm. Time seemed to warp and slow. His brain processed the image in a series of confusing, disjointed snapshots. A sweep of dark hair in an elegant chignon, a flash of deep sapphire, the quiet antique sparkle of sapphires at her neck so different from the blinding diamonds Tiffany favored, and a face that was so achingly familiar, yet utterly transformed. It looks like Ava was his first thought, a dismissive flicker. But his eyes remained locked on her. He saw her smile at the museum director, a genuine, easy smile he hadn't seen in years. He saw the poise in her posture, the confident set of her shoulders. This woman was serene, radiant, utterly at ease. Then she turned her head slightly, and the light caught her features fully. There was no doubt. It was her. The champagne glass in Mark's hand suddenly felt slick with sweat. A cold, heavy dread pulled in his gut, tasting of acid. It wasn't possible. This couldn't be his Ava, his simple, struggling ex-wife who smelled of turpentine and lived above a bakery. The woman he pitied. The woman whose life he used as a benchmark for his own success. Mark Tiffany's voice hissed beside him, sharp and urgent. "Who is that woman with Sebastian Devereux? Do you know her? Her dress is a custom, Alistair." Tiffany knew designers. It was her language. And a custom Alistair paired with a Devereux was a statement of elite belonging. Mark couldn't speak. He could only stare as Sebastian, with a hand placed gently on the small of Ava's back, began to guide her into the hall. Their path would take them directly past the spot where he and Tiffany stood frozen. Propelled by a tidal wave of disbelief and a desperate need to confirm the impossible, Mark took an involuntary half-step forward, his mouth opening to say, "What? Her name?" to demand an explanation. Sebastian noticed the movement. Without breaking his stride or changing his pleasant expression, he subtly adjusted his course, guiding Ava in a slightly wider arc. It was a masterful, almost imperceptible gesture of protection, the social equivalent of a checkmate shielding her from an unwanted interaction before it could even begin. But Ava had seen him. As they drew level, her clear, calm eyes met his. Mark's heart hammered against his ribs, bracing for the impact of her shock, her anger, her hurt. He received none of it. What he saw in her gaze was far more devastating. There was a brief flicker of recognition, the kind one might give to a piece of half-forgotten furniture from a previous home. It was devoid of malice, of triumph, of any emotion at all. It was the placid, detached acknowledgement of a past that no longer held any meaning. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of dismissal, so complete, so full, and then turned her attention back to Sebastian, who whispered something in her ear that made a genuine laugh bubble from her lips. And then they were gone, swept away by the tide of their own importance, personally escorted by the foundation head toward table 1, the gleaming epicenter of the entire gala. Mark was left in their wake, an invisible man. The councilman he'd been talking to had vanished. He felt the eyes of those nearby on him, saw the exchanged glances and raised eyebrows. The story was being rewritten in real time in 100 whispered conversations. Mark Reynolds wasn't the man who had traded up. He was the monumental fool who had let a queen walk away. "Mark, I asked you a question," Tiffany demanded, her voice low and trembling, with a rage born of pure social humiliation. "Who is she?" He finally found his voice, a choked, broken sound. That's my ex-wife. That's Ava." The look on Tiffany's face, a mask of horror, disbelief and incandescent fury, was the beginning of the end. He looked at the flimsy card in his hand that read Table 42, and he looked across the vast, glittering expanse at Ava, seated at the heart of it all. The chasm between them was no longer just a feeling. It was a measured, public, and unbridgeable distance. The spectacular life he thought he was living was suddenly revealed to be a cheap, pathetic imitation. The remainder of the gala passed for Mark in a state of surreal muffled horror. He and Tiffany sat at the geographical and social wasteland of Table 42, but it might as well have been a different planet. Every burst of laughter from the hall's center, every round of applause, seemed to be a personal commentary on his failure. He could feel the shift in the room's dynamics, as if it were a drop in barometric pressure. The few acquaintances who had greeted him warmly earlier now offered curt nods as they passed, their eyes flicking from him to Table 1 and back again, the unspoken question hanging in the air. He couldn't tear his eyes away from Ava. He watched her, a reluctant astronomer charting a newly discovered star. He saw her listen with genuine fascination as the elderly philanthropist Matilda Weston, the matriarch of the Weston Group he had so desperately wanted to approach, held her hand and spoke with animated affection. He saw the way Sebastian Devereux's eyes never strayed from her for long, his gaze a mixture of pride, adoration, and profound respect. The true agony arrived during the live auction, when the auctioneer announced a private recital with a world-renowned cellist. Sebastian raised his paddle. Another bidder countered. The price climbed, reaching astronomical figures. Finally, Sebastian made a definitive, show-stopping bid of $500,000. The hall fell silent. The auctioneer, beaming, asked if he had any dedication. Sebastian took the microphone, his voice calm and clear, reaching every corner of the vast room. "I'd like to dedicate this to the brilliant artist who restored my family's greatest treasure, and in doing so, brought so much beauty back into the world. To Ava Thorne." A wave of warm applause swept the room. Mark felt the sound like a physical blow. He watched as Ava, seated at the center of this universe, blushed a deep, lovely rose and placed her hand on Sebastian's arm, a gesture of intimate, shared joy. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph for her, and for him, it was the final public nail in the coffin of his pride. "I have a headache," Tiffany said, her voice like chipping ice. The words were a flimsy excuse for the cold fury radiating from her. "I'm leaving." She stood, her movements sharp and jerky in the glittering red dress that now looked garish and desperate. She didn't look at him. She didn't wait for him. Her exit was a small public drama, a clear abandonment that did not go unnoticed by those at the surrounding tables. Mark remained seated for another 10 minutes, a solitary figure at a table for two, the shame a hot, heavy cloak on his shoulders. He finally stumbled out, avoiding all eye contact. The triumphant text he had sent Ava just hours before replaying in his mind like a fool's epitaph. The next morning, Mark awoke to a silence in the condo that felt cavernous and damning. Tiffany's side of the bed was cold and perfectly made. Her clothes were gone from the closet, her cosmetics vanished from the marble vanity. She had moved with the ruthless efficiency of a liquidator closing a failed asset. His symbol of victory, this temple of glass and steel, now felt like a mausoleum. At 9:15 a.m., he forced himself to make the call. He dialed the direct line for Stephen Howell's office at Blackstone, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. An assistant answered, her voice professionally placid. "Mr. Howell's office." "Yes, this is Mark Reynolds from Bainbridge for Mr. Howell." A brief pause. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reynolds, but Mr. Howell's schedule is fully committed for the foreseeable future. I'll be sure to pass along that you called." The click of the line was deafening in its finality. The door hadn't just been closed, it had been bolted and welded shut. The call from his own boss came an hour later. "Mark, my office, now." The tone was grim. He wasn't fired, not outright. The world of high finance was more subtle than that. He was told there were concerns about his recent visibility and the need to manage perceptions. He was being moved off the primary client accounts and onto an internal risk assessment project. It was a corporate Siberian exile, a slow, quiet death for his career trajectory. He returned to the empty condo that evening to find Tiffany there, flanked by two movers who were carefully boxing up a sculpture she had claimed as hers. "What is this?" he asked, his voice hollow. Tiffany didn't look at him. She signed a clipboard one of the movers handed her, before turning to face him, her expression stripped of all pretense and affection. This was a merger. Mark, she said, her voice as cold and hard as the marble countertops. Our assets were combined to increase our market value. I invested in your potential. Last night our stock didn't just dip, it crashed. It was a catastrophic loss. And she said, picking up her designer handbag, am divesting. And with that, she walked out of his life, leaving him alone with the echoes of her brutal, transactional assessment. He was a bad investment. That's all he had ever been to her. Left in the wreckage of his life, he did what he had always done. He turned to the internet for validation. He scoured the society pages, Vogue, Tatler, the New York Times, desperately searching for a photo of himself, some proof that he had been there, that he mattered. But he was invisible. He found dozens of photos of the gala, each one a fresh torment. There was Ava laughing with Sebastian. There was Ava talking with the senator. And there, in a high-resolution photo from Getty Images, was the shot that finally broke him. It was a candid of the couple, she looking up at him, he looking down at her, and the love between them was so palpable it seemed to generate its own light. The caption beneath it read, "Philanthropist Sebastian Devereux," and his partner, celebrated art conservator Ava Thorne. Celebrated art conservator. The words mocked him. The cute little hobby he had ridiculed was her profession, her identity, celebrated on a world stage. He finally understood. Her life wasn't small or simple. It was focused, it was purpose-driven. His life, with its frantic pursuit of external approval, its desperate need for an audience, was the one that was truly small. He had been so busy trying to build a spectacular facade that he had forgotten to construct anything of substance behind it. The morning after the gala, Ava awoke to the familiar, comforting scent of yeast and sugar from the bakery below. Sunlight streamed through the large window of her apartment, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. She stretched, feeling a profound sense of peace settle into her bones. There was no emotional hangover, no anxiety, just the quiet hum of a night that had been against all odds, wonderful. She found Sebastian in her small kitchen, wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, competently making coffee with her French press. He had already been downstairs and returned with a paper bag of warm croissants. The domesticity of the scene, the easy intimacy of it, felt more real and more valuable than all the glamour of the night before. They sat in her breakfast nook, drinking coffee from her mismatched mugs. Sebastian slid his tablet across the table, open to the photo of them, the one Mark had been staring at. He watched her face carefully. Was it as difficult as you feared, seeing him? Ava looked at the photo, at the confident, serene woman who was her. She thought about that moment, the split second, when her eyes had met Mark's across the crowded room. She remembered the shock on his face, the crumbling of his smug certainty. A year ago, the memory would have brought a sharp, satisfying sting of revenge. But now, honestly, Sebastian, she said, her voice thoughtful and clear, when I saw him, I felt nothing, a distant sort of pity maybe. It was like looking at a photograph of a stranger who was once in your life. The emotional connection is just gone. He doesn't have any power over me anymore because I'm not playing his game. I'm not even on the same field. She reached for his hand. My life is here. In this apartment, with the creaky floors. In my workshop, with the smell of paint. With you. Her phone sitting on the counter began to buzz. An email notification popped up. The subject line read, "Client inquiry via the Western Group." It buzzed again and again. The gala, it turned out, had been the most effective marketing campaign imaginable. Viridian restoration was no longer a cute little hobby. It was an in-demand, top-tier service. She realized the transformation hadn't happened in a single night. It hadn't been the dress or the jewels or the billionaire on her arm. Those were just the external proof of an internal change that had been happening for months. painstakingly in the quiet solitude of her workshop. She had been restoring herself all along. Sebastian hadn't rescued her. He had simply been the one who recognized the masterpiece that was already there, waiting beneath the grime of her past. The simple life Mark had mocked hadn't been an ending. It had been the crucible. Ava's story is a powerful reminder that the best revenge is not loud or vindictive, but the quiet, undeniable hum of a life well lived. She teaches us that true wealth isn't measured by condo views or designer labels, but by self-worth, passion, and the courage to build a life that is authentically yours, even if others can't see its value. She didn't need to defeat her ex-husband. She simply outgrew him, proving that the most profound victories are the ones we win for ourselves. If her journey from heartbreak to empowerment resonated with you, if you believe in the power of second chances and finding strength in what others dismiss, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it, someone who is building their own beautiful, simple life. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of drama resilience and ultimate triumph. Your support helps us continue to bring these incredible narratives to light. Thank you for listening.